Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Collections in Onyx 3, presented by Graham Bell, as well as Caroline Saccucci. Graham is with EDItEUR, the organization that both created and helped and maintains Onyx. Caroline Saccucci is with the Library of Congress. We have two presentations today, one from Graham that's actually been pre-recorded. Graham, as you probably know, is based in the UK, and so with time differences and other commitments, he's unable to attend today, but in his capable number two, Chris Sainer, has joined us today as well to be able to answer questions. The presentations will be followed by questions at the end, but we ask that as you have them, feel free to add them, particularly to the Q&A box that's on the bottom of your screen. That's a good way for us to be able to track them. We'll try to get to all of them before we finish up, but don't necessarily have to wait till the end. We'll be monitoring them as we go. So I'd like to start by introducing Graham Bell, who's a colleague and friend who's been working at EDItEUR for more than a decade and has helped really introduce Onyx 3 to the industry. Graham is a frequent contributor to many things at BISG. We're happy to have him today talking about collections in Onyx 3.
Good afternoon and welcome to this BISG coffee break seminar on collections in Onyx 3, presented by me, Graham Bell of EDItEUR. In this session, we'll be looking in some detail at what are often called sets and series, but in Onyx, the terminology is collections. We'll look at the key principles that govern how collections and multi-item products are described in Onyx, and we'll be studying the metadata for a small real-world collection. And finally, if we have time at the end, we can look at how collections can be numbered and how they can be unambiguously identified. So let's start by looking at the terminology. In book publishing, we often use the terms set and series, but at the same time, we're often rather hazy on just what the difference is between the two. So rather than use terms that we can't quite define, Onyx 3 says, let's just call them all collections. In fact, there is a difference, and it usually matters more to librarians than it does to publishers and retailers. In principle, at least, you can buy a complete finite set as a single product, like a boxed set. In contrast, a series is an indefinite and ongoing group of publications, with new products coming along all the time. Whatever you purchase, it is, or soon will be, incomplete. These definitions I've popped up on the screen come from an extensive glossary of terms in the Onyx 3 implementation and best practice guide. Having said that, if you have an ongoing series of novels and the author dies, does that series then magically become a set because it's now complete? It's questions like that which drove Onyx 3 to treat sets and series, or collections, in the same way. Earlier versions of Onyx treated sets and series differently, but in Onyx 3 they are both just collections. Now what we have to do is differentiate between products that are in a collection, that are part of a collection, and the box set itself, which is a collection as a whole. And that seems a lot simpler. And before we get too far into it, I should add that these are bibliographic collections, where the shared identity of the collection is a vital part of the bibliographic description of the product. There's a second type of collection, which is one that's defined post hoc, and usually not by the publisher. These are called ascribed collections, and I won't say anything about them today. So to create Onyx product records for products in a collection, there are just 16 simple rules to follow. And here they are. I'll let them scroll past slowly so you can read them. Got that? These rules are taken from this, the rather dense and detailed 25-page document, How to Describe Sets, Series and Multi-Item Products in Onyx 3. Luckily, there's plenty of simple, practical guidance. So let's just take a look at a real-world collection. This collection consists of a trilogy of novels written in the 1990s by Philip Pullman: Northern Lights, The Subtle Knife, and The Amber Spyglass. Note that Northern Lights was entitled The Golden Compass in North America, but these three are the UK versions. You probably know the books. There was a much derided 2007 film of the first novel, also called The Golden Compass, and more recently, a much better TV series, which has so far covered the first two novels. There are lots of different versions of these books, published by Scholastic: hardbacks, paperbacks, ebooks, digital and physical audio. But I've picked out these three from 2017. All three were republished with new covers and new ISBNs to tie in with the TV series. And here I've listed some of the metadata. And a disclaimer: this isn't necessarily what the publisher put in its own Onyx. The first book has the title Northern Lights and a collection title of His Dark Materials. That His Dark Materials collection title is a shared identity, shared across all three books in the collection, whereas Northern Lights, or The Subtle Knife, or The Amber Spyglass are the titles of the individual books. But these three books were also available in a boxed set. For this collection of three books, you have 4 products and, of course, 4 Onyx records. As you can see, the individual title of the boxed set is His Dark Materials, which is the same as the collection title that's shared across all 3 books in the collection. Perhaps this seems odd, but the box set isn't part of the collection, it's all of the collection. Its product title is the same as the collection title of the 3 books, and for the box set, you don't repeat that shared identity twice in both title and collection title. In fact, you can often add an empty no collection tag to emphasize this. Looking at another part of the metadata, the first 3 books are simple paperbacks. Their product form code is BC, and they're normal standalone products. So that's product composition 00. The box set isn't, as a whole, a paperback. It's a so-called multi-component retail product in a slipcase, which has product form code SC. In Onyx 3, you probably also set the box up with product composition code 10, a multi-component retail product. This product composition is something of a belt and braces repeat of product form, but all this is actually simpler and clearer in Onyx 3 than it was in 2.1. Now, just as an aside, if you read the documentation, you'll see terms like multi-item and multi-component. You don't need to worry too much about the difference. They're more or less interchangeable. But the key is whether or not the bits in the box could be sold as individual product items on their own, or whether they could only make sense as a whole along with the other components, like the parts of a kit. In this case, the product has multiple components, but each component could be sold as a product in its own right. So it's kind of midway between the two. Now you'll also see that for SC, you need to add product part. This was optional in Onyx 2.1, but it's clearly vital that customers know what's in the box. So product part is mandatory in Onyx 3. And I should emphasize that this box set product, this whole collection product, is a real product. Sometimes there just isn't a box set or anything similar, so there won't be an Onyx record for that 4th whole collection product because it doesn't exist. As a purchaser, you just need to purchase some or all of the products in the collection individually. If there isn't a whole collection product, you can still, if you want to, create a kind of placeholder Onyx record for the whole collection product that doesn't exist. It's much the same as the Onyx record for a real whole collection product, but with the difference that it has product composition 11. That's multi-item collection retailed only as separate parts. So you've got three options: 10 if it's a real product, 11 if it's a placeholder, or you just don't have a record for that whole collection product at all. And you should also ensure that you use unpriced item type to emphasize that placeholder record, if you have one, is not sold as a set. That's unpriced item type code 05. And of course, you may choose not to give that placeholder an ISBN. And the third part of the metadata that I want to highlight is this, the related product section. First off, you should say that each of the individual novels are included in the box set. That's product relation is part of code 02. And conversely, you should say that the box set contains each of the three novels. So that's 3 repeats of related product, each with the includes relation, code 01. And I should say that you can do that in addition to using product part. Although if you include product part, you maybe don't need the product relations. Second, you should add a second sort of relation in the same collection as. That can be particularly important for senders or data recipients who don't use collection identifiers. You could do this in 2 ways. Link them all together with 6 relations, 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 2 to 1, and so on, as shown. Or you could just link all the others to the first one in collection, like 2 to 1 and 3 to 1, and then cross your fingers and hope that recipients can infer the full set of 6 relations from the 2 that you've made explicit. I know which choice I'd make, and even though it gets a bit unwieldy with larger collections, ideally that extra work should be done by your IT system, not by a person. Note that each of the 4 products in the end has a relationship with every one of the other 3. So what does the Onyx look like? Well, here's what could be the part of block 1 where the title is. For one of the books, The Amber Spyglass. And the title of the book is entirely as you'd expect, but you'll see that there's also a collection composite with title detail inside it. And this other title detail contains the His Dark Materials collection title. Now, note the title of the book itself has a title element level code 01, whereas the shared identity, the collection title, has a title element level of 02. It's the element level that's important to tell the title of the book apart from the title of the collection. And just as an aside, you can also see I've used title prefix and the empty no prefix tags within the title elements so the titles of the various books can be sorted alphabetically. And now let's look at the equivalent section of Onyx for the boxed set. You can see that the title of this product is His Dark Materials at element level 01. Sometimes, for emphasis, we call this the product level title to contrast with any collection level shared title at level 02. And as I said before, if you follow the rules, this box set doesn't actually have a collection level title because it would just be a repeat of the product title and you don't want to repeat it. So you can, and this is optional, add a no collection empty element. Now, what about the product parts? Here's the part that represents one of those 3 novels, Northern Lights, which is a part of the box set. The product part composite includes a product identifier, the ISBN of course, and you can optionally include a product form. The latter isn't mandatory because the idea is that as a recipient, you'd use the ISBN to look up the product form details in the other Onyx record for that product. But it can sometimes be convenient to have the product form of the product part here. Of course, you're going to say there's only one copy of that ISBN in the box set, because another option is for quantity packs, where you might have, let's say, 24 identical Bibles in a box, or a classroom pack of 25 textbooks and one teacher's book. And remember, you're going to have 3 of these product parts in the boxed set. You can only see the last of the 3 here on screen, but there's no relevance in the order of the 3 parts. You can, as an option, flag up one of them as the primary part, but in the case of this collection, all 3 parts are equally important, so you don't. Okay, there is a dumbed down version of this too. Simply saying that there are 3 unidentified paperbacks in the box set. This isn't recommended, particularly when each of the parts is a product in its own right, like it is here. Now, sticking with the box set, here you can see the related product section in block 5 of the Onyx. We have a relation code of 01, which means includes. You should read that as this product includes that. This product, the box set, includes that, the book with that ISBN. It's all too easy to get these relationships the wrong way around, so you end up stating that the book includes the box set and the box set is part of the book. Be careful of that. The box set includes more than just a single book, of course, so you have further repeats of related product. The second related product composite says that the box includes the second book. And of course, you have a third related product down below. And let's have a look at the opposite of that. Here we have the related product composite for one of the single books in the collection. And it says that the single book is part of the box set. Code 02 means in part of. You'll understand that the includes relationship and the is part of relationship form a reciprocal pair. The box includes the book and the book is part of the box. Once again, in theory, one clearly implies the other, but I'd always choose to make both of them explicit. And here's what the in-same collection relationship looks like. This is a single book. The Amber Spyglass is in the same collection as that book, Northern Lights, and that's relation code 30. If you're being maximally explicit, there would be 2 such relationships for each of the 3 books in the collection. This in-same collection as relationship is particularly important if there isn't a box set. There's just a collection of books that you can buy individually. And that's because you can't always rely solely on the collection title to link that bunch of books together. Ideally, you'd have a collection identifier, which could render these in-same collection as links redundant. And we'll look at collection identifiers in a little while. But then again, even if you do supply a collection ID, not every recipient uses it. So let's pause here and review what we've already looked at. First, we use title element level to provide clarity on what's a product level title and what's a collection level title. Secondly, we have a clear distinction between the product form of the individual products in the collection and any collection as a whole product, like a box set. And note that there may not be a collection as a whole product at all, but you can optionally have a not for sale placeholder record. Third, we can use various methods to link the items in the collection together. The collection title itself, related products, and maybe even a collection identifier. So far, so good. Let's move on to a topic that's maybe the second most complex bit of Onyx 3. Now, we've already seen this on a previous slide. This is how the book title, Northern Lights, and the collection title, His Dark Materials, can be represented, with a collection composite holding the details of the collection title and the title detail composite outside of collection holding the book title. However, this is only one of two different ways of doing it, and it won't always be the right way. Okay, we'll call this one method 2. And this is method 1. You'll see that the collection composite has disappeared and the collection title, the whole of the collection level title element, has moved adjacent to the product level title. Want to see that again? Let's go back. So we're back to where we were. This is method 2. And this is method 1 again. So why are there two different ways of doing it? And how should you choose which one to use? Well, it's nearly all about emphasis. Which is the more important? The shared identity of the collection or the identity of the individual product within the collection? Or put another way, is the title of the book itself sufficiently distinctive? If the title of the book is sufficiently distinctive, and it doesn't always have to be qualified with the collection title, use method 2. If the book title is not sufficiently distinctive and you always need to accompany it with a collection title, use method 1. And here I've suggested how a recipient might choose to display the title with each method. Obviously, recipients aren't guaranteed to do this. If you're a publisher, you should make the choice between method 1 and method 2 for each of your collections. Interestingly, this could to some degree be a marketing decision, and the choice might even change over time, as it has for the Amber Spyglass. That older cover doesn't even have a collection title on it at all, though it is on the title page. But there's more emphasis on the collection title now with the more recent versions of the book, perhaps in part due to the TV series being called His Dark Materials. And whatever you do, be consistent within each collection. Always use the same method on all the products in the collection. So that's the difficult bit out of the way. Let's finish off with a couple of simpler things. First, collection identifiers. There's a variety of identifiers in code list 13 for collection ID type, but the standard identifier here is the ISSN, the International Standard Serial Number. It's used primarily for serial publications like newspapers and academic journals. It's not commonly used to identify Onyx collections, except maybe in France and a couple of other places. So here instead, we've got a proprietary identifier. That's code 01, an identifier that's made up by the publisher. As always, a proprietary ID type needs an ID type name to differentiate it from all the other publishers' proprietary identifier types. And 0012-PB is the publisher's ID for this collection. That PB. It isn't usually good practice to build affordance into identifiers, like in this case, indicating that the books in the collection are paperback. But it does help distinguish this collection of 3 paperbacks from some other very similar collections, maybe a collection of hardbacks that would have the same collection title but a different product form. And that could be called 0012-HB. Or, as in the case of His Dark Materials paperback collections, there's a parallel collection of paperbacks with illustrations by Chris Wormel, which has the same collection title and product form, but it would have an ILL code in edition type. The point here is that the collection title is not always enough to distinguish one collection from another, just as the title of a book is not always enough to distinguish one book from another. Finally for today, some collections are just a bunch of books. Other collections have an order, a sequence, and this order might be made explicit on the books, or it might be implicit. Some versions of the Amber Spyglass have volume 3 in the His Dark Materials collection on the cover, and others don't. For explicit numbering, there's an XML element called part number. This is another bit of the title detail composite, and it appears alongside the title, or any subtitle will be in there too. The temptation with the part number is to use title element level code 02, collection level. I mean, it's volume 3 in the collection, right? Well, no. Title element level 02 is for the shared identity, and volume 3 is not a part of that shared identity. It's at product level code 01 because it's part of the unique identity of one book in the collection. Of course, part number doesn't help at all if the collection order is only implicit. So for these collections, there's collection sequence. In fact, collections can have several different types of implicit sequence. An order defined by the original publication date. A different order defined within the narrative itself, maybe. Think of prequels, published late but narratively early. Or even a suggested reading order that can be different again. Code 04 here means that this is a narrative order. So this book, whatever it is third in the narrative order, but might have been the second one published because a prequel was added later. So that's it for collections today. Method 1 or method 2, collection identifiers, and collection sequencing. Chris will answer any questions you have at the end of the session, but if you want to follow up later, here are our email details.
I'd like to thank Graham for preparing that and doing such a thorough job of it. We do have a couple of questions that have come in that we'll hold off until answering until we have hear from Caroline Saccucci, who's joining us today. Caroline is the Chief of U.S. Programs, Law and Literature Division at the Library of Congress. She's a member of our Metadata Committee and the active participant in a project that we did now, I guess 3 years ago, to help define what fields in Onyx make sense for the Library of Congress and its SIP portal. Caroline, obviously this is an important part of what the Library of Congress thinks about in terms of accurately describing collections. And we're glad to have you here today to talk about that.
Thank you, Jonathan. I am very happy to be able to follow Graham in his talk about collections from an Onyx standpoint. I'm going to be talking a little bit about what librarians think about this concept of collections. And let me share my screen. Okay, you should be.
Yep, you're good.
Okay, great. Let me just close. Oh no, I accidentally opened the chat thing and now I can't get back to it. Hold on one second. You're still seeing my webinar, right? I mean, my slides, correct?
Yes.
All right, so good morning. And thank you again for your participation this morning. I'm going to be just talking about how to effectively describe series and sets in your metadata from the librarian's perspective. And there we go. The first thing I want to mention is that librarians do have two concepts. We have monographic series and multi-volume sets, which Graham also talked about, but he talked about them together as the concept of collections. And we think about them as series and sets for the very reasons that the Onyx has to be described or has to be, the way the Onyx has to be arranged, or how you complete an Onyx record matters to the librarian's perspective as well. So from a monographic series, the item will have its own individual title, but all items have a collective title. And he gave you a good example of that. And you'll see that example later on in my presentation. Each individual title would be cataloged separately on its own bibliographic record. And the series title is included in every bibliographic record for each separate title in the series. And of course, series can be numbered or unnumbered. This is a very simplistic definition, but it gives the concept and sort of relating to what Graham was saying. So for instance, this is a bibliographic record in the library's catalog, the Library of Congress catalog for the amber spyglass. And in this situation, the cataloger looked at the item and determined that the amber spyglass was what was going to be highlighted, and that we could argue that it was in a series that was numbered in book 3. And the way that this would have been something you could apply for in the CIP program would to be in the title information section, you would put in the amber spyglass. And in the series information, you would add the series title, His Dark Materials, and then you could add the series volume, book 3. There's no ISSN for this particular series. The SIP data, or the information that we in the SIP program would send back to publishers, would look like this. And anybody who's trying to look this up, you won't find it because I had to do some futzing with, because these are such old records that they look a little different in our catalog. So don't try looking for it, but I'm showing it to you as an example of what it would look like. So for instance, in this case, the title is showing as the Amber Spyglass. And the series is showing here is His Dark Materials, book 3. That's what would happen if you sent us that data that looked like that, or in your Onyx look like that. In contrast, multi-volume sets could be cataloged either with a single catalog record, no matter how many volumes a set contains, so that they can be shelved together, or separate catalog records made for each individual volume of the set, according to the specific subject or classification number appropriate to the particular volume. So you can think about the examples that Graham gave where something is distinct. Therefore, the title is distinct, it stands alone, therefore we can catalog it individually as well. And a multi-volume, to make it more complicated, a multi-volume set can also be part of a monographic series. And catalogers spend an enormous amount of time trying to parse all these things out and think about them. And we have copious rules and regulations for how and decisions to make on how to decide how to catalog something. So if you think it's complicated for Onyx, it's at least as complicated for catalogers to think about how to make it findable for someone. So here's an example of a single bibliographic record that is representing one multi-volume set. So this is the title, and 245 is our field for title. So Socrates Critical Assessments. And that is the title, happens to be in a series called the Routledge Critical Assessments of Leading Philosophers. And it has 4 complete volumes, and there they are listed. It also happens to have one box set ISBN. It's possible that each individual volume has its own ISBN, and for some reason at the time in 1996, which was when this was cataloged, that there was not any individual ISBNs, and of course that's a tangent ISBN. Again, this is very old, but the concept still applies. None of these individual titles could really stand alone as their own record, as their own thing. And even if they could, what would the series be? Socrates, or sorry, what would the series be? Socrates? That's kind of a strange series. So it's and the way that Graham was discussing concept of whether or not something can stand alone or not applies also to the librarian. So if you were going to apply for such a title in for the SIP program at the Library of Congress, you would give it the title, Socrates, subtitle Critical Assessments. And then your series, since this happens to be in a series of its own, this is in the Routledge Critical Assessments of Leading Philosophers. Doesn't happen to have a volume number, but that's okay, it doesn't have to. But then you would be able to include every volume number along with its individual ISBN. In this case, I gave them all the same ISBN, and it's not even the ISBN that it really goes with that particular set. But the concept of they each can have an ISBN. You could also add a set ISBN. That could be the name of the volume title, is set. That way it would show up I take that back. I wouldn't do that. I would only add the volume, the numbered volumes and the titles for those individual volumes. And then when you would get the SIP data back, you would get it like this. There is the title, Socrates Critical Assessments. There is the series, the Routledge Critical Assessments of Leading Philosophers. There are the volume numbers, and there's the box set, ISBN. Now, another example is a separate bibliographic record. In this case, we have the Alhambra by Washington Irving, happens to be one of the volumes in the complete works of Washington Irving, volume 14. This is a really good example of something that's part of a multi-volume set that is on its own individual bibliographic record and has its own distinct title, because there's only a finite amount of works for Washington Irving. There's not going to be more than the complete works. So the complete works, there might be 15, 16, 35 volumes, who knows? This is volume 14 of it. But the Alhambra is distinct. It is its own individual work and it stands alone. Therefore, it can have its own title and be cataloged separately, as long as the series is included in that information. So in this case, the title is in the SIP request would be the Alhambra, but then you would add a series title for the complete works of Washington Irving, and it's volume 14. And when you receive the data from us, there would the title be the Alhambra, and there would the series be. And that is my very brief, very tight little discussion about sets and series. I wanted just to give you information here. The link would provide all kinds of information if you haven't seen it before on the way to apply for SIP data, for instance, or how librarians think about sets and series. And certainly you can contact me for more information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline, and welcome, Chris. Yeah, that would be, you can stop that. And Chris, welcome as well. We have a few questions already, and maybe I'll start with one from Clark, who's asking an Onyx 3 question. Can you have 2 collections with the same content, but with 2 different product names? He uses an example of Tor Books, which has multiple box sets with the same books collected, but with different names. And in this specific example, he's saying the series that was formerly known as the Ender Quartet had a box set of 4 books. The series is now known as the Ender Saga and has a box set update with that name, but with a different title. It's the same content, but each product has a unique title. Does that present problems within Onyx?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for your question, Clark. No, from an Onyx point of view, it doesn't present a problem. A single product can have 2 or more collection composites, so you can repeat the collection composite. It may be a problem for data receivers, so you need to check with them. You can also use one of the collections and send a former title. The Onyx code list that gives title types, which if I think is 15, you have the option to send former titles, so you could send one collection composite saying this is the former title of the collection. You can also use relationship to say has replaced if the former collection products have new ISBNs. You can use the replaced option as well. So there are different options depending on the circumstances, although as with all these things, Onyx may allow it, but check with your main data partners to make sure they would actually understand that.
So not surprising, Onyx is flexible in how you might market even the same collection of books differently.
Yep.
Caroline, I'm not sure if this is in your wheelhouse or not, but it's a question about how newspapers are cataloged. Essentially they have many issues published under one newspaper title. Are newspaper bibliographic records handled differently than books, and why?
Yes, newspapers are considered a serial publication insofar as they're continuing and they don't end. And in fact, sometimes when they end, another version of that newspaper comes out, maybe published by somebody else. So those are not in scope for the library's CIP program. However, the US ISSN Center, the International Standard Serial Number Center, is in my division, and they are responsible for the assignment of ISSN to serials. So newspapers is one of those that would be in scope.
So one of the things that it sounds like that differentiates is that it is not ending. I mean, there's always going to be new material for existing newspapers.
Yeah, and the confusing thing about it is that a monographic series in and of itself is serial. It doesn't necessarily end. And that's what makes it A, eligible for an ISSN, and B, extra complicated. So, and there was a time when Library of Congress staff spent an inordinate amount of time trying to develop what we named series authority records to sort of capture how those series would be interpreted and cataloged and so on. But series don't end, multi-volume sets do. And series, by definition, the series itself is a serial, but it's cataloged, its individual parts are cataloged as monographs, if that's making any sense. So you end up getting a little bit of a mishmash there. So you would never, we would not accept a series in that sense to catalog in the SIP program, the series. It always has to be the individual volumes of a series that are getting cataloged or application. Does that make any sense? I don't know if that's complicating.
It does, and it harkens back to something. It harkens back to something that Graham presented in his prepared remarks about ISSN and the series and sets redefined as collections in Onyx 3. That's part of the motivation, is to help provide a standard that gives you flexibility, but at the same time recognizes the sometimes unique aspects of Onyx. I think going back to you, Chris, from Katie's asking, a multi-item product on Amazon is defined as a product bundle. Is there a preferred way or best way to say whether that box set is paperback or hardcover? And will a proprietary code work, or should they put the product form in the description?
Okay, good question. I can't obviously speak for Amazon and Amazon's practices, but from an Onyx point of view, in Graham's presentation, product part is where you define what the bundle is made up of, because if you're using the multi-item retail, its formats are what it contains. There is a code list for product packaging, but that just says it's in a slipcase and what kind of slipcase it is. So the fact that it's paper or the fact that it's hard is in the product part. As Graham also said, you do not put affordance into an identifier. We created that model ID just as an example, but you can't rely on somebody being able to understand that the identifier also identifies the format. So it would do no harm to put it in the product description as well, because I do not know if how Amazon picks up product part and how they use that. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks. I just want to let folks know that we're running a little long, but I'd like to be able to give both Caroline and Chris a chance to answer questions. If your schedule requires you to drop off, please do. We'll be sending a copy of the recording to everybody, so you'll be able to pick it up and hear anything that you might have missed. A question from the chat, actually, if I can just go back a bit, was is there any recommendations when cleaning metadata, meaning to go back to your backlist, how much of a problem it might be to renumber editions of a series? Maybe both Chris and Caroline can answer from your perspectives.
Do you want to go first?
Renumbering editions in a series. So from an Onyx point of view, if it's a new edition, and from an ISBN point of view, we'll get a new ISBN. So I'm just trying to think, renumbering editions in a series. When you, I know that you do have to renumber in series sometimes because there's a prequel comes out and you want to call that number 1. And in Onyx 3, there is in the sequencing, you can do that. Ideally, your interface has something that allows your system to do most of the work for renumbering. Those sequencing, the Onyx sequencing element of Onyx 3 is quite flexible. It has various ways, so you can say this is the new numbering, this is the recommended order, this was the original publication order, things like that. But we do realize that when you update any sort of metadata like that, there's a bit of work involved in that. Always think about end user when you're looking at data cleaning. It's going to make a big difference for librarians. It's going to make a big difference for retailers. It's going to make a big difference for readers. They want to know. There's nothing more frustrating when you want to buy something or read something, thinking, that's the new one, or that's someone I've missed, and then finding misleading information. So I think that's probably the consideration to take when you're looking at cleaning up metadata.
And Caroline, how about from your perspective? How do you feel about it as a cataloger?
Right, so the cataloger is always going to be looking at the piece in hand. If the thing that we're cataloging says it's volume 10, it's going to remain volume 10 until a publisher decides they want to reissue the series and send a whole nother set, and then we're going to have a whole new bibliographic record where now it's something else. And I would agree with Chris that that's a very complicated thing for the end user. Now, in theory, you now can see that there might be 2 of the same things sitting next to each other on the shelf, and one is volume 8 of the series and the other one is volume 9 of the series, but it's the same book, in effect, the same content. So I think I would take a hard look at that from a publishing standpoint as to whether or not that makes the most sense to renumber things like that.
Great. So that you kind of come back to Chris's closing remark, which is think about the end users,
That's right.
and so that before you make that change.
Mm-hmm.
Just a more general question from Hannah. Are there recommendations for how to identify sets and series within sets and series? For example, a long series of novels that are divided into trilogies, or an overarching series of early readers with some sub-series that have recurrent characters. I guess Star Wars comes to mind, but there probably are many other examples.
I know
There's a nightmare, but go ahead, Chris.
from an Onyx point of view, you have collection, sub-collection, sub-sub-collection. Now, that is something, Hannah, that you want to know from the beginning. This is the main collection, and this is a sub-collection of it, and then this is a sub-sub-collection. Because to go back to Kenneth's question, if later on you decide that this is now a sub-collection of this collection, you can have to push things down, and it can mean a bit of data cleaning. But from Onyx, it's that collection, sub-collection, sub-sub-collection, and that's distinguished in that title element level. That list that said 01 is the product title, 02 is the collection. There's also the same thing for sub-collection and sub-sub-collection. Caroline.
Yeah, I would just say we do have the concept of series and sub-series and sub-series. I guess you could have. I gave you the example, of course, as of the multi-volume set of Socrates, and happens to be in a series called the Routledge Library of whatever philosophers. That happens. So we have a way to handle it. When you're getting into the children's literature, juvenile fiction world, and there's all kinds of ways that things can be marketed and sold and packaged, and subsets and trilogies. There's a team in my division actually that handles a lot of those materials, and have far more expertise on thinking about and cataloging that kind of complexity. But we are prepared to handle it if it comes our way.
And Hannah, just and to everybody, we at EDItEUR intend to bring out, we sort of separate collections in Onyx into the simple, it belongs to one collection, and then the more complex collections, especially in education, academic and in the world of children's, where you get these multi-level comics as well, where you get these multi-level collections, and we want to bring out an app note and some guidance to give people more an idea. Yeah, and having had to map out some examples to do the explanation, it's not easy, but it's good to think about it in advance if you're going to have multi-level.
Thank you. Lauren's asking a question that says, where do you put the name of a serial in a record? Is it the same field that you'd use for a set or a series? And I think Graham had said yes, but I want to start with you, Chris. This is my interpretation, right?
Yes, it's the same thing. You use that title. It's in ONIX 3. You put the name of a series set. Just goes in that title composite using that 02 collection, title element level collection. So yes.
And you may also include ISSN information if it's signed.
Yes, if it has an assigned ISSN, or if a publisher has its own proprietary collection ID that's unique for that collection, good thing to include as well.
So if I could ask, though, I want to be clear that we're talking about a serial as opposed to a series, because the question says, where would you put the name of the serial in a record? Is it the same field that you would use for a set or a series? So does ONIX actually capture serials as a format?
ONIX for serials is a different format, and yeah, no.
So I think the question from Lauren, if what you're trying to find out is if I confused you by saying that sometimes, I mean, you can think of a series, a monographic series is a kind of serial, but not in the sense of like a newspaper where it is always the title of your, it's just sort of subsidiary almost, where it's just sort of a thing to collect things. That's the form, that's the purpose for a monographic series. It's like these things all belong together. These are all part of the Routledge Library of Philosophers. But it's an ongoing, there could be an indefinite number of books written about these philosophers. So therefore it's ongoing. And the concept is serial, ongoing. I don't think you would use a serial title like a newspaper or a journal in ONIX for books, right? So that's, I just want to be clear that that's what we're talking the same thing here. Yeah. I don't know if that, Lauren, if that helps or not to clarify with your question. But if you're asking, can the series title or the multi-volume set title go in that field, then I think the answer is yes, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Caroline. That's a really helpful clarification. Catherine is just asking or observing that some of their books are not put into a series editorially. They've not been given a series name on the books, but they're loosely grouped with the same cover style and content themes. And, you know, I think this is perhaps from a librarian's perspective, but would you recommend formally grouping them later for marketing and online discoverability? Is that helpful from a cataloger's perspective?
Right. So Harry Potter comes to mind. There was never, to my knowledge, at least at the time that it originally came out, ever the Harry Potter series. They all came out sequentially. There was no volume numbering. They each have their own individual titles, Harry Potter and the blah, 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 Harry Potter and the blah, blah, blah. So in theory, everything would be set together with J.K. Rowling's material on the shelf, but not because they're in a series, only because they all have the same title, way the title starts, and the same author name. But there was never, when Scholastic put it out, I don't remember ever seeing, and I even looked in our catalog, I'm like, is there a series for this? There's no indication of a series. If you want your books to be identified in that way, it is helpful to be clear that this book is in a series and do something like put a series title on your book in addition to the, and don't think that a librarian would extrapolate and say, oh, this is the Harry Potter series officially. They might think of it in those terms, like, you know, we all think about the Harry Potter books, but it's not evident from a cataloging rules perspective that there is a series title that then goes in the record and that we all know it by that title. So yeah, if you want things to be grouped like that, it's important to think about and explicitly state that.
Chris, from an ONIX perspective, they support all of these options.
Yes, From an Onyx point of view, you can switch from having a no collection to making it part of a collection, and you then send out an update with the Onyx records. That concept of marketing collections can be dealt with in Onyx. I won't go into the complexities of French collections, but there's no problem with updating via Onyx. Onyx allows for that, switching from no collection to collection. And Caroline, I remember when first Harry Potter came out, being the book buyer in a children's section and thinking, oh, this might be quite good. No, there was no concept of series, or they didn't even know if there was going to be a second one, didn't know if it was going to be successful or not. So.
And it has happened that after the second or third thing, the publisher decides, oh, you know what, I think this is going to be a thing. Let's capture it that way. But then what would happen is that from a cataloger's perspective is we'd get the third thing, and it would say volume 3, but we then have to scratch our heads and go, well, what were volume 1s and 2? Because it's already been published. We already have it. We didn't catalog it as a series, as a part of a set. What's going on with it? Are we supposed to consider it? Yeah, so it can get a little complex that way. Yeah.
Julia's clarifying the question, can a series name be added even when it's not identified on the cover or title page? In an Onyx point of view, yes. Onyx allows for that because Onyx knows that we know that that happens in the commercial sector. Caroline, from a cataloging point of view?
I think we've gotten a little bit more flexible about where we can take a series title from. There was a time when it had to be either on the title page, the series page, the cover, the back cover, the colophon, somewhere where we could easily identify it. And it is preferable, I will say, to do that. I think we try to, it's nice when what a publisher would think about from a cataloging perspective, also from a user perspective. Would a user identify this easily as part of a series if you don't actually explicitly say that this is part of a series? What is the benefit from the Onyx perspective of hiding it, that it's a series, but you don't actually say so on the piece? So you think about, like, why would you do that? Are you trying, if you don't want to market it that way, we probably aren't going to find it easily and want to identify it that way in our bibliographic record, or where a user wouldn't find it that way. So,
but when a publisher happens, the publisher book, it becomes successful, the author. There are some things like the Philip Pullman originally, there was always an intention to publish those as a trilogy, so that was always explicit, even if the series name wasn't always printed on the cover. But there are books that of course come out. Onyx, you can do that. You can update and you can send information that this is an update to this. But it's, yeah, and so we do know at EDItEUR, when we've created Onyx, that publishers sometimes make these decisions later in the commercial cycle. And also there are identities that are created. Fans create the world of Lyra's Oxford. There are things that come out because other things come out, other books, TV series and things like that. So you then get notions that get created later. And Onyx can deal with all that.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Caroline, for extending your schedules and taking us to the hour. We really appreciate this. As I've said, we'll take the recording and Graham's slides, and Caroline, if you'd like us to include yours, we'll share them with the folks who registered for this event. And we look forward to seeing you both in the future and at the next Metadata Committee meeting.
Thank you so much. Yes, you have my slides, so take them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.